Welcome in. My name is Paiman. This is the Paiman Tokhi report, and we are talking about Amanullah Khan, which is the king of Afghanistan in 1919 up to 1929. Him, um, he is the son of Habibullah Khan, which was the previous king of Afghanistan. His father, Amir Habibullah, who was assassinated in February 1919, and then Mr. King Amanullah Khan, his son, took over, and he was fiercely anti-British. He wanted to destroy an old agreement which gave the British control over Afghanistan's foreign policy. The British, of course, resisted, and there was some skirmishes, and there was a war, and it was actually the Third Anglo-Afghan War in 1919, which King Amanullah Khan won, and he was deemed a hero and just, the king of Afghanistan. He actually declared himself king in 1926, but he was, the ruler of that time in Afghanistan. Everybody legitimate, everybody recognized him, even the British, even the West, the whole world. He was he was he was he was then able to shift focus, and we're going to talk about some very interesting facts about him and his life and what he did. And he was in power for about 20 years. So we're going to focus on his time as the ruler, and what he did. He basically was educated, and so his wife Soraya. The wife was named Soraya, and both of them were educated and focused on modernizing Afghanistan. So he went to Europe a lot. He was in Syria, and he was in Turkey, and he would visit in different places like France and Paris. There's a speech of him talking really good about France and how Paris is welcoming Afghans, and he was very open to Western modernization. But I would like to say that he focused more on superficial modernization. Things like everybody wears suits, and then everybody wears, he started to even for women, he started to tell women to wear Western clothing, which was part of his downfall because the conservative right wing Muslim Islamic society in Afghanistan, the locals there were, it was too much too fast for them. So they decided that it was too much, it was too fast, especially with the unveiling of the women and his wife, and showing her hair in public, and just being out wearing modern clothing. Yes, his wife was, wearing modest and clothing, which was covering everything, but she would wear stockings. She would wear no veil. If she wore a little veil, it would be like a see-through veil, and it was just so. At one point, Soraya, which is the queen of Afghanistan, she ripped her veil off, and it was a sign of protest against it, and she basically got some tempers flaring there, I bet, back then. So there was some modernization after the independence that he fought for, and then people talked about it and wrote about it, and said at one point during this one jirga, which what the Pashtuns call, where people gather, and the leaders gather, and the elders gather, and they debate, and they hold elections and just talk about how they're going to go forward. It's their way of debating and coming up with decisions amongst each other. So at one point, he made all of those locals who would usually wear like a paiman tumban, which is, they'll wear a head covering, and then they'll wear their regular traditional clothes, which we call paiman tumbans in Afghanistan. He made all of them wear suits that were not very tailored and loosely, and then they just looked very very out of place. But that just goes as to show that it's a sign of him trying to modernize Afghanistan in a very superficial way. Instead of looking at some kind of substance, like, for instance, modernizing the manufacturing sector, modernizing the energy sector. He did go into infrastructure, and he was building roads and westernizing in that sense, and bringing in cars, which was pretty new back then. No one had cars like that back then, but that was the modernization was definitely, and in large part had to do with materialistic and more of superficial. That's how things. So it was more of caricaturements instead of substance modernization. So, with that being said, this was slowly beginning to add up with the westernizing of the clothing, especially for women. People started to rise up and say, hey, this is not us. This is too much, too fast. And he was ousted, basically, in 1929, and he was exiled into Europe, where he lived the rest of his life. And his dreams of modernization and stuff like that were unfortunately cut short, to say the least. So he lived until 1960. Let's see, what else could we show? I would like to show a clip of him talking. Here it is.
آمدن امروز خود بسیار خوش ممنون هستم و پذیرایی که به من ملت فرانس و هیئت علمیه فرانس می‌فرماید مرا ممنون و شاد می‌سازد. این فرانس است که برای علم و عرفان افغانستان سعی بلیغ می‌کند. فرانس است که اول اولاد ما را در پاریس قبول فرمودند.
He said that it's France who accepted our kids into France, and
فرانس که در عالم علم و عرفان و تمدن خود را آشکارا ساخته. لذا به همه ممنونیت، به همه حس ممنونیت تشکر میکنم از این ملت و از این مقام علم و عرفان عالی که امروز آمده.
That's not it.
It was the roaring 20s. New technologies, new music, and new fashion were transforming the world. Radios and telephones made the world smaller. Moving pictures and automobiles made the world faster. But the change wasn't just about technology. It would also be about values. And nowhere were the values being challenged more than by the King and Queen of Afghanistan. The world had been ripped apart. By the end of World War I, 15 million lives were lost around the globe. But the fighting did finally end, and when it did, the world needed rebuilding. Across the globe, a new hope for the future was coming to life. That hope believed that a revolution in values and technologies would put to rest the madness of war. Afghanistan remained neutral during World War I, but the impact of the war was anything but distant. The entire world was wrapped in the war, and nations vied for the country's support. The king, Habibullah, played his suitors off of each other. But only a few months after the armistice, King Habibullah was assassinated. In February 1919, his third son, Amanullah, took the reins. Amanullah understood that the world was being radically transformed, and he knew that Afghanistan could take a prominent place in the new order if the country underwent quick and serious changes. He sought guidance from Mahmud Tarzi, an Afghan intellectual who had once been exiled and had lived abroad in Turkey and Syria.
He, during his exile, had lived in the Middle East.
Mahmud Tarzi was one of his advisors, and he basically was Mahmud Tarzi spent a lot of his time outside of Afghanistan, and it just kind of shows he was older than Amanullah as well, and actually Soraya, which is the wife of Amanullah Khan, is actually this guy's daughter, so they're very close. You can see he's even wearing a suit in this picture,
and had been very influenced by movements in the Middle East for modernization, for trying to decolonize the Middle East, to bring Islam into a new renaissance, a new period of flowering, intellectually and politically, that looked to, it was a movement that looked to indigenous roots, to Islam itself, as an example for education, modernization, and reform.
Now,
this new interpretation of Islam was being embraced by elites across the Muslim world. They believed that a modernized Islam could...
That is a very important part. Let's just listen to that one more time. This is Dr. David Edwards, D.B. Edwards.
Trying to decolonize the Middle East, to bring Islam in by movements in the Middle East.
He sought guidance from Mahmud Tarzi, an Afghan intellectual who had once been exiled and had lived abroad in Turkey and Syria.
He, during his exile, had lived in the Middle East and had been very influenced by movements in the Middle East for modernization, for trying to decolonize the Middle East, to bring Islam into a new renaissance, a new period of flowering, intellectually and politically, that looked to, it was a movement that looked to indigenous roots, to Islam itself, as an example for education, modernization, and reform.
This new interpretation of Islam was being embraced by elites across the Muslim world. They believed that a modernized Islam could coexist with westernization, allowing Muslims to excel in the 21st century.
This is Mahmud Tarzi and his wife, which shows that Amanullah Khan and Soraya were hanging out with these guys a lot, because you could just see that in the pictures that's going to come about in a little bit that Amanullah Khan and Soraya were in large part looking the same. You could see this guy is also wearing an Ottoman style hat there. So this was and he's got the facial features. She's wearing some kind of wig or hair, that's her actual hair, and a corset. What is that? I don't know.
Tarzi provided Amanullah with intellectual inspiration for a new Afghanistan.
So
he also provided the king with a wife.
So Mahmud Tarzi is very important in this case because his philosophy transitioned into Amanullah Khan, who's the leader of Afghanistan, and he gets a lot of his influence from Mr. Mahmud Tarzi, and also Mr. Mahmud Tarzi gave him one of his daughters.
Amanullah fell in love with and married Tarzi's daughter, Soraya.
She was herself educated, and they had a marriage that, by all accounts and from all evidence that we have, was a real romantic love affair. You see in the archive photographs of Amanullah and Soraya that in a very romantic poses, and with Soraya's hair down, dancing, very intimate photographs for the time.
Together, the new king and queen set out to transform Afghanistan. Over the next decade.
Now, to report on this, yes, it's one thing, and state the facts and just go over what actually was the timeline and what actually happened, and the events, right? We could learn something from this. What I've learned so far from this, from the 2 episodes we've done, one on Mohammed Zahir Shah, which was the king in the 1960s, 1933, I believe, and from 1933 up to 1973. That was Mohammed Zahir Shah. He also tried his modernization. He was very influenced by this. I believe they're from the same dynasty. So they both tried modernization. And in large part, we could learn something from that these previous attempts in history to modernize Afghanistan by these guys, we could learn that Amanullah Khan was very superficial with his modernization, and he did things that would piss off the locals, man. I mean, come on. You're talking about Soraya over here, God bless her, that she ripped off her veil, and, that's very inappropriate, and you can learn that the reaction of the locals is not going to be in your favor. You might get thrown out of off your throne for that. You can imagine that's pretty disrespectful for people who are cultural and traditional and who are conservative and are part of the Islamic society. And at that time, this very progressive philosophy that Mahmud Tarzi was indoctrinating Amanullah Khan with, and maybe Amanullah Khan, I'm giving Mahmud Tarzi too much credit. Maybe Amanullah Khan was getting influence and having his own experience and learning from his trips and learning from his other encounters, and he has his own perspective and his own sources of why he was like that. He was so modern and so progressive, but the idea to modernize Islam, that is very progressive for that time. We're talking about 1919, 1920, 1925. Right now, it's about in this timeline that we're in right now is 1925, 1924 in that time frame. So, what we could learn from that is these guys modernizing and trying to push the envelope pretty fast here. So that puts a lot of information in my head, saying, hey, you know what? Maybe the locals this time around are not gonna are rejecting currently and actively rejecting Western modernization of Afghanistan, which they did during Karzai's administration and during Ashraf Ghani's administration, and now history has repeated itself. They've been overthrown, and this has happened now for the 3rd time with Amanullah Khan, with Mohammed Zahir Khan, and also with the Soviet Union, and also with the Soviet Union, kind of, not really, but also with Ashraf Ghani and Karzai. So the whole NATO intervention there. So I would say it's happened more than 2 times, maybe 3-4 times. It's happened, and we could learn a lot from that. That's a very profound thing I've learned so far, and maybe I'm sharing it with you guys, so maybe you guys have learned as well. But quick modernization is not working in Afghanistan. You have to come at it in a very articulate and very subtle way, and more substantial, with more substance than just a superficial changing your clothes and ripping off your veil. That's very inconsiderate, and it's I can't believe they actually did that back then, and even now. I mean, not even now. That's not even it's not even like an acceptable thing. Imagine back then, where IQs and education was much lower and access to education was much lower, but there was more of traditions and cultures and word of mouth and people being taught from how, their fathers and grandfathers and mothers and they acted, and I'm pretty sure they were all very cultural and traditional, and there wasn't much of a social you couldn't take a sociology class, or just just learn more about international stuff. But anyways, to continue with the video,
they built schools, started an air force, established a national bank and a national currency.
So modernization, he did some in some parts he was very substantive. He did things that really mattered for and not just superficial stuff, but he also like she said, worked with banks, established an air force, currency.
They supported education of all sectors of society, including women and nomads.
So supported education for women and nomads and in all sectors and all people, and that's very much progressive, and I believe in that is something very substantial, and I believe that is the right of every human being for the right to education, and I don't think that's superficial at all. I really do think that's substantial, and I support that. And so did Muhammad Zahir Khan, the ruler after Amanullah Khan.
Like Ataturk in Turkey, Amanullah was obsessed with the idea of using clothing to express a new world order.
And he was fascinated with playing with those clothing, and I have a feeling playing with identity as well. One of the things that he did that also was very controversial was he held a national Loya Jirga in 1927, and he made all of the delegates to the Jirga wear Western suits and hats. And
this is in
all these proud Afghans look vaguely ridiculous wearing these baggy suits that were not tailored, not meant for them, and they look a little bit embarrassed to be made to wear this kind of clothing. But it makes you realize that Amanullah, one of the mistakes that he made is he sometimes viewed modernization in a very superficial way. He viewed modernization as the accoutrements of modernization more than the substance of it. And he encouraged all of the members of his court, the women in the court, to wear Western style clothing and to go with no veil or a minimal veil.
I do have something that's very related to who I am, is that one of my great-grandpas, one of my family members, specifically my great-grandpa, or my great-grandpa, I have the notes, was a judge in his administration under Amanullah Khan. So, very interesting piece of history that I'm directly related to and connected to. So I will learn and dig up more stuff about his time as the ruler of Afghanistan.
At a public function, Amanullah denounced the veil, saying that nowhere did Islam require women to cover themselves. Soraya responded by ripping her veil from her face, as the wives of other officials soon followed suit. Soraya knew that her clothing was being watched by her entire country, and she wanted to make a statement.
Soraya was the first, or one of the first, women to wear Western clothing outside the palace in public places. And she would make concessions, certainly, to local norms and expectations, including she would wear a veil of a sort, but it was a very light veil that you could see through and attached to a flapper hat.
Imagine that back then. But given that he did, I think these guys are focusing. This video is focusing a lot on superficial things, but Amanullah Khan did a lot of amazing thing. Of course, the fighting and being anti-British and fighting the British and gaining our independence. That's very substantial, and I love that. I think that defined his administration in large part, but also the Air Force. But we're learning about history and how things worked out. So people make all kinds of mistakes. We got to learn from our history. We got to learn from these guys and try to build something that is going to work for the future. So we're not just going in circles here. This is incredible information, life-changing, nation-changing. This could potentially change the future of Afghanistan, given that we implement it and apply it. This information. We could do something with this information, of course.
A very 20s style fashion. And so she would make certain concessions, and within the boundaries of Islam, she was dressing appropriately. She was covering her hair, she was covering her arms up to her wrists, she was covered to her ankles, although she also sometimes wore stockings. But they were always pushing the boundaries of fashion.
But together, the king and queen's changes appeared to be too much, too fast. For many critics in the country, the symbols of change were becoming more troubling than the change itself. The clothing and lifestyle of the royal couple was becoming a flashpoint for opposition to Amanullah.
The more gradual, more incremental.
This photo shows the drastic difference, the huge difference between him and his constituents, the people that he represented, the people in his circle. Look at them and look at him. Well, there is another gentleman to his right, over here, sitting just at the edge of the end of the table here. Dressed in with an Ottoman hat. It just looks different. It just looks like he's also wearing modern, or like a suit. And then next to him is a phone. Here next to him, so he has technology. He has means. He has a pen, paper. He's wearing modern, at that time, clothing, and he's taking a lot of this, his inspiration from other Muslim countries, but for these people here, but the people in front of him, the group in front of him, are not trying to hear it as much, just by the facial feature, by the facial expressions of these men. They seem very serious and kind of alert and in a up and alert, debating. This man in the middle here, his shoulders are kind of his facial features kind of like looking at him like that, and on a side eyeing him, whereas Amanullah Khan is leaning forward, and trying to make a point, but just by the expressions and stuff like that. And then you have people here on his left listening, but I guess the guy here at the end is talking. This guy here seems to be talking because the people on the left here are focusing on this guy on the end here talking. I don't. This is just a still picture, but what I could see from this gathering is that they're alert, they're listening, and they seem to be open and you know, mostly open to his discussions and his talking points. It just seems like they are expressionless in some ways. These things are important to take from these photos.
Reforms that he also was backing, which could have resulted in positive change in Afghanistan, got bowled over by the opposition to these symbolic, relatively unimportant reforms. And so I think that was one example
Unimportant and symbolic reforms
of the kinds of mistakes not only Amanullah but that all reformers in Afghanistan have tended to make. They have mistaken the superficial, symbolic aspects of reform. They've allowed those to interfere with the more substantive reforms of livelihoods, education, industry that would incrementally have allowed Afghans to create a whole different way of life from the ground up, avoiding some of those hot button industry that would incrementally, not only Amanullah, but that all reformers in Afghanistan have tended to make. They have mistaken the superficial, symbolic aspects of reform. They've allowed those to interfere with the more substantive reforms of livelihoods, education, industry that would incrementally have allowed Afghans to create a whole different way of life from the ground up, avoiding some of those hot button issues that have been so disastrous in Afghanistan.
He makes a great point here, saying that, you know, focusing on more substantive reforms like economic development and helping the livelihood of people at that time, and then the education industry, developing those in large part instead of these superficial reforms of changing clothing. That was a Western man, Mr. David, Dr. David Edwards, making his points and critiquing in his analysis, which totally respect, but I would like to get more of a perspective from our own Afghans. So we'll look for that as well.
In 1927, Amanullah and Soraya went on a tour to Europe where they were the darlings of the political and intellectual circles. They were the it couple of the 1920s, working to build a new post-war society where modern values could flourish. But at home, they were not as popular. While they were away, opposition to their reforms mounted. By 1929, an uprising led by Habibullah Kalakani broke out in Jalalabad, and the couple was forced to abdicate the throne. They lived the rest of their lives in Europe. The Roaring Twenties and all of their optimism had come to an end.
Their modernization optimism came to an end in 1929 when they finally were overthrown by Islamic the Islamic society, or just basically the conservative people there in Afghanistan. Not to say that there weren't people that supported Amanullah Khan and his modernization and his attempts and his philosophy. There were many people. Like I said, my great grandpa was a judge in his administration, and that and my family in large part were very modern and progressive for their time, education for their women. They also, but they were very conservative in their ways and their traditions as well. But and, you know, they also didn't. My family didn't have the full beard. They were more. They had my. If I showed you pictures of my grandpa, they wore mustaches, and but some of my other uncles, my grandpa's brothers, they had full beards. So it was kind of a thing. But mainly, shaved beards and mustaches. That was a sign of modernization and progressiveness in Afghanistan back in the 1920s. And my grandpa was born in 1936, I believe. But before that, my great grandpa, he was, um, of course born earlier than that, and he was a judge there. But he instilled some of those beliefs into my grandpa, which met my grandpa. I grew up with him in some parts, and he instilled some of those into his kids. And my uncle, my mom's brother, was very modern, educated, didn't have a full beard or anything like that, and like as a sign of, um, conservative Islamic um, beliefs and stuff like that, as far as like super being into it. But anyways, they their legacy did leave a large influence on a lot of Afghans, and in a lot of part we could learn a lot from this, because we're looking for civil rights protections in Afghanistan currently in 2026. We're looking for education rights for women and everyone, and more educational industry development, more economic development, more substantive reforms. The livelihood and education has to be policies that we change, and we have to look forward to changing those and look forward to helping Afghanistan grow and develop, and to a place where we all are happy to call home. Yeah, and the people that are there currently are in large part very frustrated. I do get um, their frustration. I totally get it. In a lot of ways, people are politically using them as a political tool for regime change, to overthrow the government, another violent thing. But in large part, I think since there's so many tribal leaders and tribal elders who advocate for overthrowing these progressive modernists, um, let's work with these tribal people and try to get a middle ground and a balance. They have to understand there's Afghanistan, and there's millions and millions and millions of people in Afghanistan. Not all of them are gonna you know think like they think. So there has to be a middle ground where there's some to help with the polarity in Afghanistan. There's the modernists, and there are the conservatives, and so yes. Anyways, that is the show for tonight. That is the report for tonight on Amanullah Khan. I hope you learned a few things about him. I certainly did, and I love that we were able to learn from history and see how we could use it to build the future of Afghanistan. Remember, we're part of a movement called Build Afghanistan. We're trying to help build Afghanistan and help it grow and get past this point in 2026 where there's a lot of butting heads. All right, you guys take care. You have a good night. I'm going to sign off here. Thank you for tuning into the Paiman Tokhi